Hello everybody and welcome back to ChäoS. So I believe I read this line last time, but on the off chance that I didn't, when I came back to myself, I was still seated in a sofa in the lobby. I glanced around in puzzlement, unable to grasp my situation. A hunchback old lady was sitting next to me. Her eyes were buried in wrinkles, and I couldn't tell whether she was sleeping or awake. When I looked at the clock above the reception counter, it indicated that an hour had passed since I began waiting here in the lobby. Had it all been a dream? I might have dozed off as I waited due to not having slept since yesterday. It would have been so nice if the dream were reality. I was terribly disappointed. In the end, I was forced to wait another 2 hours before they finally called my name. When I entered the examination room, I experienced the hallucination that I was having a repeat of the same dream as before. Dr. Takashina looked just the same as he had in my dream. No, it was simply that he hadn't changed in the 4 years since we last met. But he didn't rise from his chair and offer me a handshake.
今日はどうしました?
And unlike in my dream, he didn't get all nostalgic about reuniting with me.
西条です。
ん? ああ、これはご丁寧に。高階です。はじめまして。
He bowed his head to me with a smile. I couldn't say anything. Nice to meet you. Was what he had said to me just now. It screwed me up because it says was that. No mistaking it. He had forgotten about me. Of course, 4 years had passed since then, but I thought he, if no one else, would remember me. I'd embraced such expectations all on my own, but upon having them shattered, my heart abruptly began to overflow with loneliness and emptiness. I felt that he denied my existence. He looked me in the eyes as we spoke. I averted my gaze.
無遊病かどうか調べてほしいと書いてあるが、何かあったのかな?
Yes, that was what I'd written on the questionnaire form, but there was no longer any point if he didn't remember me then.
別にいいじゃん。先生が覚えてようが覚えてなかろうが関係ないっしょ。最初の目的を忘れちゃダメ。
Ah, right. I didn't come here to see Dr. Takashina. I'd come to prove that I was a normal human being. Reuniting with Dr. Takashina was nothing more than a bonus, so he'd forgotten me. So what? If Sarah hadn't warned me in time, I had been in danger of losing sight of myself.
自分でも知らないうちに外に出かけててパソコンで文章打っててそれを全く覚えてないなんてありえますか？
おお。
知り合いからそう指摘されて混乱しちゃって。
その知り合いの人が冗談を言っているっていう可能性はあると思うかい?
Yua's eyes had been serious. It hadn't seemed at all like she was teasing me. At the very least, Yua herself believed what she was saying.
わかりません。
なるほど。ちなみに、その知り合いとはどういう関係だろう? 恋人?
はあ?
What was he saying all of a sudden? And what did it have to do with anything?
いや、言い方が悪かったかな。じゃあ言い直そう。その知り合いの人は、君が意識もないまま歩き回っているのを実際に目撃したのかな?
Oh, so that's what he'd meant. I shook my head.
じゃあ、証拠はないわけだ。
I shook my head one more time.
そいつ、探偵気取りっていろいろ証拠を突きつけてきて。
そういうことか。ちなみに、これまでにも無遊病の兆候はあったかい?
いえ。
朝目覚めたらいつものベッドじゃなくて違う場所で寝てたっていうことは過去に一度でもあった?
いえ。
じゃあ その知り合いに言われたのが初めてっていうことだね。
I nodded feebly, then took the plunge and opened my mouth.
僕、寝てないんです。
もしかして怖いのかな。でもそんなに深刻になる必要はないよ。
いや、
That wasn't it. That wasn't what I'd wanted to say. But I didn't know how to explain it, and I couldn't get my thoughts in order, and as I remained at a loss, I lost the chance to speak up. After scribbling something on his clipboard, Dr. Takashina spun the chair he was sitting, so that his back was facing me, and leaned toward the back of the examining room.
葉月くん、ちょっと。
はい。
A young nurse came running over. The doctor whispered some directions to her while showing her his clipboard, and she soon returned to the back of the room. What was going on? As I sat there in confusion, Dr. Takashina turned back to face me. Next, he told me all about somnambulism in a gentle tone of voice. When people fall asleep, they start off in REM sleep, then shift to non-REM sleep. REM sleep is what happens when your body is resting, but your mind remains active, in a state close to awakening. And in opposition to that, non-REM sleep is what happens when your brain pauses its activity, and you fall into a much deeper level of slumber.
無遊病はノンレム睡眠の時に起きやすいって言われてる。脳が通常の活動をしていないから、普通の受け答えとかは成立しにくいけど、ちゃんと返事もするし、階段などを踏み外さずに上り下りすることだってできる。原因としては、精神的なストレスを抱えてる時になりやすいんだ。子供に多い症状だけど、成人でもよくある症状なんだよ。
But I hadn't been asleep. I hadn't been asleep. Though I hadn't slept, I couldn't remember what I'd done. As for the period when Shogun posted his parts of the chat from room 37, I thought I was playing ESO the whole time. Is this really what you call somnambulism? I wanted to ask him, but Dr. Takashina was steadily advancing his side of the conversation.
無遊病かどうかを調べる方法としてはいくつかある。一番手っ取り早いのはここのベッドで寝てもらうことだね。ただ特定条件じゃないと発生しない場合もあるかもしれない。例えば自分のベッドじゃないとダメとか、意識がない状態で出歩くにしても目的もなくふらふらと歩き続けるのか、それとも何らかの強迫観念があってそれに影響されて何らかの一連の目的を持って出歩いているのか。
So apparently Dr. Takashina here possesses the power of telepathy, because he's not moving his mouth at all, and yet he's apparently talking to us.
それに君の精神状態についても特定の条件下じゃないとダメかもしれない。自宅どうする？とりあえず寝ていってみるかい？
There would be no harm in letting them check up on me. After I proved I wasn't a sleepwalker, I'd ask him my original question. The nurse named Tezuki led me to the diagnostic bed in the back. Due to the fact that it wasn't meant to be slept on, it was hard and uncomfortable. Well, I had no trouble dealing with it once I compared it to the sofa I usually slept on.
3時間くらいしたら起こしに来ますから。
This nurse was awfully cute. Lying on the bed, I stole glances at her while avoiding meeting her eyes. Her slightly childlike features made her seem undependable somehow, and she gave off an aura of misfortune, but she was brisk and efficient when it came to her work. She felt like the type of heroine who might appear in an old-school eroge, one about twisted sex in hospitals.
できるだけ目は離さないようにしていますので、安心して眠ってくださいね。
In other words, she would make sure of my safety even if I manifested symptoms of sleepwalking and started wandering around.
それでは、 ごゆっくり。
The nurse gave me a small smile, closed the curtains, and left. Surrounded by blank white curtains, I released a deep breath. From around me, I could hear the voices of the doctor and a patient he was examining, the sounds of other nurses pitter-pattering around, and the sound of the examining room door opening and closing. It was certainly hard to calm down. Would I be able to fall asleep under these circumstances? Okay. Now, I don't actually recall exactly what the next scene is. But if it's what I think it was, I think we did green last time. So I think let's go ahead and mix it up. I think we've done like 2 greens in a row now. Let's mix it up real quick and we'll do a red. So figuring it was useless, I closed my eyes anyway. No matter what it did, the Guro photo from Shogun and the cruelly murdered body from the scene of the staking seemed about to float into my head. And so I forcibly began picturing Sarah.
タッキー、外出嫌いなのに病院来るなんてすごい。私前から思ってたんだけどさ、タッキーって実はすごく強い男の子だよね。
Sarah was quite lively in my fantasies. She sang out to me in that cute voice of hers.
私、そんなタッキーの強さが好き。それに、タッキーは無遊病なんかじゃないよ。私、毎日タッキーのこと見てるもん。だからわかるんさ。
This is coming from the figment of our imagination.
三次元女になんか騙されちゃダメだぞ。タッキーには私がいるっしょ。またコンテナハウスで二人きりで過ごそうね。オッケーなす。
Excuse me. You're so adorable, Sarah. Sarah was my ideal bride, after all. No woman could surpass her. The third dimension? What the heck was that? Ah, I want to go home. I want to go back and have Sarah greet me with a smile and welcome home. Wait for me, Sarah. I'll be home soon, so... When she opened the door of the examining room, the physician welcomed her with a cheerful smile.
今日はどうしました？
She scanned the area, ignoring his question. It wasn't a very large room. There were 2 clipboards spread out atop the physician's desk, one holding blank white paper and the other covered with words in a foreign language. She was said to be a demon. Everyone called her that, even her parents. She no longer cared about whether she had been a demon from the start or whether she had become that way because it was what everyone called her. In any case, she had killed 8 people over the past month. The public was in uproar. That should be in an uproar or something like that, calling it madness and what have you, but from her point of view, it wasn't an especially remarkable number. After all, she was a demon.
何か気になりますか？もし気になるものがあるなら言ってください。どかしますから。
As befitted a psychiatrist, he was very considerate toward his patients. Amused, she opened the bag she'd brought with her. What she slowly took out from within it was a 24-centimeter long sashimi knife.
それとも、もっと広い部屋にか...
Seeing it, the physician was rendered speechless mid-sentence. His expression went stiff. Picking up on his fears, she smiled tenderly. This physician would be her 9th. He wasn't her original target, only a step along the way. She set her bag down and took a single, large, soundless stride toward the physician. She used her momentum to dive toward him, piercing him with her knife. The knife penetrated his chest, slipped past his breastbone, and reached his heart. The physician died with a single stab. Already reduced to a mere object, he collapsed. Toppling toward her, she supported him long enough to withdraw the knife, then shoved the object away with her elbow. I don't know why that scream just sounds weird. The white doctor's coat worn by the object lay facing up on the floor, was turning scarlet. Drawn by the noise, a nurse saw it and screamed. She knelt as she stepped on the doctor's body, then slashed her knife at the nurse. Fresh blood flew out. It wasn't a fatal, but a gaping wound had been carved into the nurse's meek face. Again, the scream just sounds so weird. It really does. It sounds off. Letting out a howl, the nurse curled up in place, holding her face. Vast amounts of blood overflowed from between the fingers she pressed to her wound. Ignoring this, she continued toward the back of the examination room. That nurse wasn't supposed to be the 10th. It was an occasion worth celebrating, her 10th. 2 digits. That was why it had to be her original target, just as she'd planned. The other patients and nurses had already started screaming and running away. It was becoming a racket. Yet their voices failed to reach her ears. She sought him out, confident only of the fact that he was there. Her eyes stopped on a curtain. The curtain that surrounded an area about 1 or 2 tatami mats in size. There was most likely a bed inside it. You must be there. Her heart palpitated with joy. Her lower abdomen went hot at the thought that she would finally be able to kill him. Slowly approaching the curtain, she decided in the end to rip it apart with her knife rather than open it normally. When she peered through the newly opened tear, he was, as expected, lying there. Found you. She lost all resentment, she lost all restraint when she saw him. She opened the curtain and stood next to the bed. He was sleeping with a slightly pained expression on his face. She twined her fingers in her hair and gently stroked it. He didn't wake up. She gripped the knife in both hands. She raised her arms on high. She was aiming for his heart. With a single blow, just like the doctor. I'll kill you. In ecstasy, she lowered the knife with all her might. When I leapt awake, I was atop the bed, unchanged. My heart was pounding in alarm. I checked my chest. There weren't any injuries to speak of, no blood emerged, I was unhurt. I looked around. The curtain was closed, it hadn't been torn apart by her knife. I reached stealthily for the curtain. If I opened it and Dr. Takashina and Hazuki were lying there, covered in blood, my body broke out in shivers again as I envisioned it.
夢だよな。
But I couldn't muster the courage to open the curtain. What if a sea of blood lay beyond it? What if that demon girl was standing there, knife in hand? These thoughts terrified me into inaction. But then... right in front of my eyes, someone opened the curtain from outside. Shrieking before I could stop myself, I tumbled off the bed.
大丈夫ですか?
I fearfully raised my face. Hazuki was looking down at me, her eyes round. There were no traces of red blood on her white uniform, and her face was completely uninjured.
ごめんなさい。驚かせてしまって。起きているとは思わなかったので。
いえ。
She'd seen me at my most pathetic. I turned my face aside and reeled to my feet. My heartbeat still wouldn't settle down, but thank God it had been a dream. It was like I'd been watching a horror flick.
本当に大丈夫?
Worried, Hazuki looked at me more closely. I was too bashful to lift my face. It took my greatest effort to nod jerkily.
少しうなされていたみたいでしたけど。
怖い夢を見て。
そう。
What time was it? How long had I been asleep? I decided to ask Hazuki. Surprisingly enough, she said it had been 3 hours. It looked like I was more exhausted than I thought.
でも、無遊病の症状は結局出ませんでしたよ。
Hazuki told me in a tone of voice meant to reassure me.
まあ、今日はたまたま症状が出なかっただけかもしれないから、無遊病でないっていう断定はできないですけど。
No, I'm not a sleepwalker. More importantly, I had to ask Dr. Takashina my key question. But I didn't see him anywhere. Hazuki handed me a one-sheet document. When I accepted it absent-mindedly and skimmed it, it turned out to be formatted as a questionnaire.
それはあなたの心理状態を把握するためのチェックシートです。心理テストのようなものね。それを書いてくれたら今日はもう帰っていいって先生が。
先生は。
ごめんなさい。ずっと診察が続いてて。来週まで様子を見て、まだ改善が見られないようならもう一度来てくださいって。
Well, it's not like he's my personal doctor. He must have given Hazuki various instructions about what to do with me. This meant there had been no meaning in my coming all the way out to the hospital. I wanted to ask him about my petrifying symptoms, about how I was being manipulated by someone outside myself. That said, with Hazuki looking at me so apologetically, I didn't have the bravery to demand take me to Dr. Takashina. Helpless, I ended up filling out the checklist she'd handed me. I'd write about the symptoms that were plaguing me on the back of the page, and I'd come to see him again next week.
チェックシートは質問に対してイエスかノーかだけを答える簡単なものですから。当てはまる点があったらイエスにチェックしてくださいね。
I mean, our character's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs at times, but I think he's smart enough to get how a questionnaire that's formatted as yes-no works.
今後の西條さんの治療に対する参考にしますから、じっくり考えて答えてください。
Hazuki went out of her way to explain it to me thoroughly. Among the items on the sheet were ones so strange that they didn't seem to belong there in the context of a standard hospital. It really was like a psychological test. Would they actually be able to understand anything based on my answers to questions like this? Hazuki watched me unwaveringly. She didn't move to leave. It didn't feel like she had too much time to spare, more like she was observing me. No, watching over me. My nervousness at being watched made it hard for me to think. Was this also part of her job as a nurse? For the time being, I decided to hurry up and get it over with. Let's see, so, you prefer email when using the phone. Your ears occasionally start ringing. Hey, oh boy, decent amount of questions here. Okay, let's see. So your ears occasionally start ringing. Sure. You've sensed someone's gaze and then turned around. Sure. You've seen inanimate objects briefly appear to be moving. No. You've experienced premonitions. Sure. At times, when you look at a digital clock, all the numbers are the same. Can't say that. You have cried at least once in the past month. You can reach orgasms solely through the strength of your imagination. Nothing interrupts your fantasies while you're masturbating. You can picture things without closing your eyes. You sometimes see people's faces in the windshield of your car. Well, that's a little creepy. By there, looks to have gotten a little funky. There we go. Let's see. You have a hard time going to the bathroom after watching a horror movie. I mean, that seems like a pretty normal thing, for being honest. Can't handle being in haunted houses. I can't say I've ever been in one. When you read books, you become so immersed that you lose track of time. Well, I don't actually read books all that often. You believe there are planets aside from Earth that play host to humanoid creatures. I mean, the actual likelihood of that being the case is probably better than nothing, but it's still a relatively small chance, all things considered. The personality stereotypes based on your blood type fit you perfectly. Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. Partly because I actually don't freaking know off the top of my head my blood type. I think it might be AB of some type. Let's see. AB is careful when dealing with others and are empathetic. O is leadership, self-determined, easygoing, optimistic, calm, confident, outgoing, loyal, cautious, passionate, peaceful, resilient, independent, trendsetter, reliable, carefree, and devoted. Again, I don't actually know off the top of my head. I can never remember. It's one of those things that like literally never comes up. It's I believe it's either A, B, or O, but I'm really not sure. But I'd say neither of those really fit me, if I'm being honest. You believe in the existence of God? Nope. You're good at sensing ghosts? Nope. While sleeping, you sometimes dream in full color. Well, sure. While sleeping, there have been times when you knew you were in a dream. No, I can't say that. You have experienced a loss of parts of your memory. You dislike looking... yeah, you dislike looking people in the eye. Well, it's eyes, but whatever. Looking at a dried plum is enough to make your mouth full of saliva. Don't know. Never tested that. You have the feeling that yawns are contagious. Well, it certainly seems like it. And I believe there is actually science behind that. Not necessarily that they are, in fact, actually contagious. But that there's something about seeing somebody yawn, hearing somebody yawn, that makes you want to do it yourself. And it's just a psychological thing, I believe. Like I said, I believe there's some science. Somebody actually decided to study that. Because, why not?
はい、お疲れ様でした。
Though I hadn't said anything, Hazuki spoke to me at exactly the same time I finished marking the last statement. Jesus, she's just standing there, staring over your shoulder, just waiting to snatch the paper out of your hand as soon as you're done. I was mortified that she'd watched me the whole time. Maybe my face had started turning red. Which is why I meekly returned the checklist without looking in Hazuki's direction. I didn't have enough time to write down my symptoms on the back of the page.
それでは、待合室でお待ちください。お薬が出てますから。
薬?
We're getting medicine? I was getting medicine? Dr. Takashina hadn't said a single word to that effect, but...
ええ、先生の指示で。弱い精神安定剤です。ぐっすり眠れるようになるし、副作用などもありませんよ。
Now, you know that's not strictly true. All medicine has some sort of side effect. Even a weak tranquilizer will have some sort of side effect. They may not be significant or life-threatening, but I'm sure it has side effects, if we're being completely honest here. I see. How like him. How considerate. But I became depressed at the prospect of having to wait in the lobby again. It was evening by the time I returned to Shibuya. The hospital was technically part of Shibuya, but station-wise, Yoyogi was closer, so taking the train was the fastest way to get there. But the Yamanote line was as packed as always, and though I had to ride only past 2 stations, this round trip alone wore me out a lot. It'd be agonizing to take the train any further, so I got off at Shibuya Station and walked back to my base. For all that, there were too many people in front of that station. I hate huge crowds. They make my head spin. Not wanting to stay any longer than I had to, I tried to cross the pedestrian scramble. But it took a big effort just to walk in a straight line here. If I swayed even a tiny bit, I'd bump into the person passing me and overtaking me. Plus, people handing out free tissues kept getting in the way, forcing pocket-sized tissue packs at me. Sick and tired of it, I ignored the first guy, but the second one turned out to be a rather cute lady, so I took hers. Those tissue dispensers are a serious hassle. Don't stand smack in the middle of... those tissue distributors are a serious hassle. Don't stand smack in the middle of the street like that. Well, but I'd go ahead and take them since they're free. The tissue pack I'd taken had come with a flyer which consisted solely of white letters on a background of red paper. It was pretty freaky looking. You didn't see this kind of this kind of color usage all that often. I read it nonchalantly as I walked. Supplies of Type B blood are currently inadequate. The demand for transfusions far exceeds Shibuya's supply of Type B blood. At this rate, it will become terribly difficult to provide adequate amounts of blood to those who need it. I thought I heard my timer going off, but no, it's still got a little bit to go. And in the worst case scenario, some may die. They won't survive without your cooperation as a donor. Something. By all means, be sure to stop by the blood donation site. Something. Chibiya station of the Inokashira line. So, it was a blood donation flyer. Reading it, I recalled the checklist I'd filled out at the hospital earlier. I couldn't remember filling out something like that 40 years ago. Maybe their diagnostic methods changed recently. Yet, for some reason, the checklist seemed familiar. Deja vu. All I'd felt lately was deja vu. It made me sick, the fact that my own mind and body wouldn't act the way I wanted them to. I dug through my memory in hopes of somehow being able to pin down the source of this deja vu. The days when my mother took me to the hospital every week, I kept my mouth shut at all times and indicated where my will lay solely by nodding or shaking my head. At first, they had looked at me in a regular examining room, but when I showed no signs of getting better, they eventually started taking me to another room. It was what you'd call a counseling room, with a sofa and lots of stuffed animals lying around, a space with one goal, to make patients relax. Without blaming anyone, Dr. Takashina persevered in trying to treat me. He was the only one who noticed that it wasn't that I couldn't speak, it was simply that I chose not to. My mother talked to me about all kinds of things in a falsely bright voice. Dr. Takashina always greeted me with a refreshing smile. The nurses were nice to me too, and I had the feeling that there had always been one more person in the room. Right. He wore a solid black suit, which was very odd since we were in a hospital. He was always silent, like me, and I never so much as heard his voice. At the end, I couldn't find out anything about him. His behavior wasn't like those hospitals. The physicians and atmosphere around him were also different, and he always stood aside by himself, gazing out the window. I'd internally called him Nozomi, but since he'd said it, or not because he'd said it was his name.
Nozomi.
The suit-clad man always wore a small badge on his chest. The word Nozomi was inscribed there, but since it had the design of a logo, it couldn't have been his name tag. Right. Nozomi had also been printed on the checklist I'd filled out earlier. I'd felt like I'd seen it somewhere before, but now I finally remembered. At last I felt a little refreshed. That aside, what was this Nozomi? The only certainty was that it must be the name of a corporation.
のぞみさんっていう美人女社長が設立したカウンターテロ組織とか、漫画みたいだ。
That's an interesting concept. When I got back to my base, I immediately ran an online search for Nozomi, but a ton of results came out, and I had no way to narrow them down to one. Well, thinking about it, normally Nozomi could be the employee who had the aforementioned checklist, or maybe a salesman who had come to the hospital with his wares, that kind of thing. And lately, they'd finally started to make use of his stuff, including the sheets they'd had me fill out today, or the sheet they had me fill out today. Nah, the chances of that were pretty damn slim. I heard nothing of them letting an outsider like that sit in on a patient session. In the end, who or what had Nozomi been? I got fed up once again at the emergence of these nagging memories. Whatever the case, I identified the source of my deja vu. I decided, next week, I would consult with Dr. Takashina about my memory issue. After seeing him, I shut myself up again. I shut myself up again and stopped going to school. I couldn't go to school, not when it was full of people trying to hurt me. Thankfully, I didn't really want to get my minimum attendance shift chart too messed up, but it wasn't worth dying for. I stopped running searches about Nozomi and began browsing for interesting looking threads on that channel. Let's see. 63 name, Morning of the Anons. New Gen News, Flash Bear. New Gen number 1, Group Diving. Number 2, Pregnant Man. Number 3, Sticking. Number Unknown, to be continued. The news board consisted almost entirely of new gen related stuff. I completely lost my patience when even the ESO board turned out to have threads like, let's try reenacting the new gen murders in ESO. Why? Grim was there when I went to wallow in ESO. That channel's news board has gotten pretty boring lately. All anyone ever talks about is the new gen stuff. Yeah, because it's the biggest thing going on right now. Epic threads spilling up. Epic threads spring up all over the place every time there's a new incident. They haven't caught the perp yet? Come on, the police are powerless. Some of the LOL. No, never mind. I was screwing up. Some of these idiots online are portraying the perp as a moe bishoujo. LOL. That demon girl. I flinched as the dim eyes of the girl I'd spotted at the scene of the staking murder grazed my brain. I didn't want to keep remembering it like this, but the second I let my guard down, the ominous memories started to flood back. Yeah, I had seen the criminal's face. I knew who she was. Should I have reported her to the police? But I didn't want to get caught up in it. Demon girl? Finally a version like this came up? But hey, that's in pretty poor taste. Anyway, I'm telling you, the new gen cases are really interesting. I joined a new gen in Furapara. That's overboard. You and Sister Centipede are the only ones in our guild who haven't joined, man. Yeah, seriously? That meant I wouldn't be able to jump in on the conversation when we were all chatting. New gen isn't run-of-the-mill, it gives me chills. I knew you were into Guro stuff. But don't tell me you're the type to see murders as works of art. To be fair, I had mistaken the staked-up body for an object of art, as I were. So if I were forced to put it one way or another, then yeah. What? So if I were forced to put it one way or the other, then yeah, was quite artistic. Word got left out. That should probably be, then yeah, it was quite artistic. Nah, I look for really twisted stuff instead. The ultimate SM type stuff. You're hopeless. You should hurry up and fix yourself up, or... Nightheart, pop your cherry and you'll come to understand it too. You ass, you want to say you're not a virgin? You traitor! Setting that aside, the new gen wiki is seriously packed with stuff. Go give it a look, dude. Ugh. I don't want to see it because it's scary. I wanted to escape from reality, where I witnessed the scene of the crime. With that one goal in mind, I started to block out every piece of new gen related news. By doing so, I'd hoped to convince myself that the gruesome spectacle I'd seen had been an illusion, but... ESO, I was on the same level as a god. It wasn't enough to merely be strong, I also had to know about anything and everything. All the more, I was the closest to position of leader of our guild. What? I was the closest to position of leader of our guild had to a leader. No. No, that does not read right at all. It really doesn't. I mean, it might technically be correct, but it doesn't read right, if I'm being honest. Normally you would just say, I was the closest to a leader that our guild has. It's shorter, and it just sounds right. As a person in charge of everyone's organization, it'd be way too humiliating if I couldn't keep up with their conversations. I had to avoid that. I headed over to the wiki Grimm had told me about. The title New Gen Wiki was displayed in huge letters on the front page. Compilation sites like this are an example of a type of wiki where an indeterminate number of people post news and information about a specified topic. A New Gen Wiki like this was bound to be fairly fast moving, with all kinds of people posting stuff related to the New Gen cases. Unreliable information and flaming were mixed in, although it was convenient because it was much easier to understand the whole picture. There were a lot of links pasted in too. I started by reading one called A Timeline Up to the Present. My heart started beating faster. I was nervous, even though all I was doing was reading a website. The palms of my hands were soaked in sweat. In the first incident, commonly known as the group diving, high five, no. 5 high school students committed suicide together. September 7th, approximately a month ago, in the middle of the night at Shibuya's Cornelius Tower, they leapt from the heliport on top of the building and died instantaneously. Autopsies revealed that each of them had scratch marks and foreign bits of flesh under their fingernails. It was then theorized that they had been holding each other's hands when they jumped off. There was nothing resembling a will or a suicide note left behind on the roof. By going to Cornelius Tower in person, an online personality known as Snake discovered that only employees were given access to the rooftop, and that the door leading there was practically always bolted shut. Naturally, it was also locked at the time of the incident. The key to the roof wasn't found among any of the 5 victims' belongings. In short, circumstances suggested that the rooftop heliport had been sealed to entry, and it remained completely unclear as to how the 5 students had gotten in. Well, I've got a theory for that. There was a 6th person who lit them up, and then locked the door behind them. Thus, as far as anybody would be concerned, the 5 who jumped magically got up there, because there's nothing to indicate how they would have gotten up there. But that's just my theory as to how that would work. Because that's the only that would make sense, really, if we're being honest. If there is only one way up, and that one way is locked, and nobody who was up there had a key or whatever would be needed to unlock it, you would have needed a 6th person to let them up, basically. There was a high possibility that someone, aside from those 5, was present at the time of the incident. The second incident, commonly known as the pregnant man, occurred on September 19th, 12 days after the first incident. Early in the morning, a college student going home after karaoke sighted a blood-drenched male corpse in the area near the underside of the Shibuya Station overpass. The man, Konoe Chizuo, was a student of Shibuya Area College, and though he had already died by the time his body was discovered, his abdomen had been unnaturally swollen. According to the autopsy, someone had cut open his abdomen, shoved a newborn fetus into his stomach, and sewn him back together. A DNA analysis established the fact that the victim and the fetus were not blood relatives. The victim was unmarried and had not been carrying on any relationships with women. Online speculators believed that since the fetus had been approximately 32 weeks old, it must have been removed from its mother's body via C-section. But no one knew who the mother was, where she could be found, or what she was doing at present, or even whether she was alive or dead. Perhaps the police had tracked down her whereabouts, but at the very least they hadn't announced it to the public. On the verge of vomiting, I turned my eyes away from the monitor. How revolting. The perpetrator had to be insane. And on top of all that, to think that this vicious murder might have been committed by that girl. Japan is over. I stared at Sarah to help my eyes recover. Somehow I managed to stabilize my mental state. I thought about taking the medicine Dr. Takashina had given me, but it looked like I could still succeed in getting by with just Sarah. But it was tough to read about this guru, even for the sake of preserving my reputation as Nightheart.
そんなに辛いならさ、読まなくていいって。タッキーがド M ってんなら別に止めないけど、辛そうなタッキーは見てられないさ。もうやめよう。楽しいことだけしてようよ。いつもみたく私にハーハーしてもいいからさ。
Sarah was so kind to me. Sarah was the only one who would stay as my ally, as expected, since she was my wife. I rested my chin in my hand and took deep breaths as I gazed at Sarah's smile. I could feel her healing me. If I kept an eye on Sarah as I read, maybe I would be able to hold out a little longer. I decided to put this into practice without delay. To begin with, why had two cases without any common features whatsoever been collectively labeled New Gen and treated like the same thing? The group diving had initially been treated solely as if the victims had committed suicide. After the pregnant man incident, however, people online re-investigated the group diving, and once they discovered the unnatural circumstances surrounding it, the rumor maybe they were killed in such a way so as to make it look like suicide began to spread around as a new explanation. The parents and close friends of the 5 who died in the group diving kept saying that there was no way they would ever have committed suicide. At that point, the mass media seized on the fact that both cases had occurred in Shibuya and began using New Generation Madness in their sensationalistic headlines, which was said to be how it all got started. And then the third incident, the one I had witnessed, commonly known as the staking. Since few days had passed since the case opened, the wiki site didn't contain a lot of information on it yet. All that had been made public was that the victim was Ota Hisashi, a 56-year-old college professor, and that the murderer had used stakes to pin his corpse to the concrete wall of an abandoned house. Residents of the neighborhood where the crime took place reported hearing a sound of someone hammering starting at around 8 p.m., time when the murder was estimated to have been committed, and lasting for over an hour. I heard it as well. It had clung to my ears, a nasty sound. On a side note, no connection between it and the group diving or the pregnant man had been uncovered yet. However, since it was the third bizarre incident to happen in the very same Shibuya, people naturally started treating the staking murder case as part of the New Gen phenomenon. The police and the media view the 3 cases having been the work of different people, but according to online commentary, or more properly, online expectations, them having been committed by the same criminal or by the same group of people was the most popular explanation. It seemed like a lot of places online also gave it occult explanations, and some believed that everything stemmed back to the earthquake 2 months earlier. 2 months ago, a magnitude 3.0 earthquake had occurred, with Shibuya at its center. 8 people died, despite the fact that it had been a relatively small-scale event. And as a result, it became a big topic of conversation. Now that they mentioned it, the New Gen cases had indeed begun after that earthquake, but that doesn't mean anything realistically. That's just a coincidence. Thus, the people who supported an occult explanation for the New Gen argue that the 8 deaths from the earthquake should be counted as the first New Gen incident, which led to fierce debates between them and those who supported the most popular explanation, the same criminal theory. In any case, the truly abnormal part of it was that though 3 brutal crimes had occurred in succession, no clues as to the perpetrator's identity have been discovered in any of them. Either way, net crowds are lusting a 4th incident. If I hadn't been involved, I would have certainly joined the festival, and maybe I would have been waiting with bated breath for a 4th case. Damn it, those bastards sure have it easy.
犯人を早く捕まえてくれよ。
Over a week had passed since the staking, but neither that demon girl nor the police had shown any signs of movement. If they were aware that I'd been in the area, surely the police would have at least come to question me, but at the moment they didn't seem to be doing anything about it. Thank goodness. Looks like I'm not going to get dragged into it.
あなたには予知能力がありますか?
The words Yua had thrust at me passed through my
予
head.
知能力があるって思わなきゃ納得できないような画像データをあなたが持っていたから。
Now, it should be noted, unless those precognitive powers allow you to magically pull images, pictures, whatever from the future, that doesn't seem like the best explanation. Because, yeah, you can give me precognitive powers, but unless the image that was sent to us was like a artist's drawing of what the murder would look like, it doesn't make any sense really, because again, you can't magically create data that does not exist. And that picture is just data. It's a bunch of bits and bytes telling which pixels deform which colors and things like that in a pattern that resembles an image that we see. So there's no way to have magically pulled that from the future unless you know exactly what it'll look like and you like literally from scratch in like machine language basically create that image. So precognitive powers does not in any way explain how we would have that picture before the murder happened. Realistically, I should have mentioned that much earlier on, but I just haven't. For whatever reason, I just didn't think to do it then. I've been feeling reassured, but 1 second was all it took to send me right back into my gloom. The image Shogun had transmitted to me. Even now, it lingered inside my PC as data. What Yua had told me was just the product of her own delusions. It was too incoherent to hold together logically. I hadn't gotten to ask about it at the hospital today, but it didn't make any sense for me to be acting differently, unbeknownst to myself during the gaps in my memories. It had never happened before, not even once. Which is what that Guro pic totally had to be. Which is why that Guro pic totally had to be a composite.
だったらさ、合成だって証拠を見つけちゃえばいいさ。あの画像解析しちゃおうよ。
But it made me sick, so I didn't want to look at it very much.
あの女を論破しちゃえば、タッキーはもう怯えることなく平穏な生活に戻れるんだよ。
Not quite how it works, but sure.
やるしかないっしょ。
True enough, it's just as you say. You had talked about it like I was the perpetrator of the staking, but that was out of the question. Because I myself had seen the perp's face, like I'd let you force guilt for the crime on me. I sucked in a sharp breath and double-clicked the folder where the image should have been cached. Oh, thank God. I say that because I was about to say we're approaching an hour, so let's go and end this here. Okay, never mind, not a big deal because we just got the transition that I normally wait for when it comes to ending these parts. So I will see you all next time. Quick reminder that I do have a Patreon and a Discord. You can find links to those down below in the description. The Discord is my go-to place for posting about channel happenings, so I do recommend joining that if you want to stay up to date on when I do live streams and the off chance you care about that type of stuff. But also, that is another way for you to get notified whenever I post a video. I do have it set up so that a bot in my Discord channel will make a post whenever a video is posted. I don't have it at everybody. In fact, I set up a separate role called Get Notified that you have to react to a post to get that role. And once you get that role, the bot, when it makes its posts, it's supposed to alert anybody basically who has that role. Is the way it's supposed to work. And I'm pretty sure it actually is working correctly. At least when it came to videos, it did not seem to be quite working properly when they would do announcements for when I started live streaming, but whatever. But yeah, so that's another way to stay up to date. Make sure you catch all the videos that you care about on the channel, because I know sometimes YouTube doesn't show people's videos in your subscription feed because of just the way YouTube system works. My understanding is if you don't watch somebody's videos often, it will actually decide to sort of basically penalize that channel when it comes to showing their videos in your subscription feed. Why YouTube has it set up like that, I don't know. I guess their thought process was to avoid cluttering people's subscription feeds, but that has its own set of issues. Because what if then the channel that's basically being penalized posts a video that people want to watch, but then they don't know that the video is posted because they just hadn't watched a lot of that channel's content for a couple of months or whatever, and so that video doesn't show up in the subscription feed. Great job, YouTube. That's a stupid idea. But that is apparently, to my understanding, how it works, so yeah. So Discord is, like I said, another way to be able to get notified about videos going up. And as for the Patreon, that is the easiest and the best way to help support the channel if you enjoy the content. So I do recommend that you go ahead and become a patron if you enjoy the content and you want to support the channel so I can continue to bring you this content that you enjoy. But until then, goodbye. Well, until next time, rather, goodbye and farewell.